Okay. Hi, Richard. How are you?
Hey, good to see you, Douglas.
Oh, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Listen, it's a pleasure to be here.
You are the CEO of StoryWork International, is that correct?
That is correct.
So, what do you guys do?
Well, we've been working with the power of story I've been for over 30 years. My colleague, Scott Livengood, I think almost a similar length of time. His path's been a little different than mine, but I've been looking at how to apply the power of story both in people's personal lives, but organizationally. How can organizations become more effective using the power of story? And how do leaders become more effective in their leadership style and in their actions? Capitalizing on the power of story.
Okay, so, but what exactly does your company do? Do you do speaking engagements? Do you make
Well, I was
films?
speaking,
Do you...
yeah, but one of our major products is a thing called the Master Story Experience. So we'll come into a company, and we think that companies today will be more effective and garner more support from their consumers or buyers or customers if they have an aspirational purpose. And so we actually help people, the companies, discover what that purpose is. And we have a whole process that is about telling the story. And at the same time, we have a companion piece of that, which is about helping the leaders in the organization discover what their deepest calling is. And so we actually lead them on a day-long journey, discovering what their core story is, and then looking at how that can become the centerpiece of everything they do in their work. We do some other things. I do work with people like the Center for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership, which is down in Winter Park, Florida at Rollins College. And I teach nonprofits how to use story to be more effective in their fundraising, for example. And then we do a few other kinds of workshops. I've worked with large organizations who need to be better at telling stories. I worked with a big governmental organization this past summer. They have a lot of technical, scientific people, but part of their sort of expectation is that they tell stories that exemplify the work that they're doing in communities to make a difference. And that's not something very good at. So I spent 2 days teaching them how to be better storytellers and story writers.
Well, this is an interesting concept because you mentioned nonprofit, and I could see where the storytelling aspect would certainly help them to attract investors and people who want to contribute to their
Donors,
cause,
right?
donors,
Mm-hmm.
right? However, in a profit company, it seems to me it's driven by the profit. And
Well, yeah, but I think that has been the story of capitalism up until fairly recently. It was all about the bottom line, right?
yeah,
But you're finding today that consumers want to do business with companies that aren't just doing well profit, from a profit standpoint, but they're also doing good in their communities. So there's been a big disconnect, I think, in the way business has been done for many years, where if it was all about the bottom line, it didn't matter if we pulled out of that community and destroyed the community because it was less expensive to have the plant over here than there. We've done business in a way that it was okay to degrade the environment because it was cheaper to do it that way than to do it right. So I think consumers today are actually demanding companies that they be responsible. And so it's no longer just about the bottom line. It's also about other factors. It's how you take care of your people. How do you take care of your community? And so I think we're expanding the notion of what it means to be a company and what it means to be successful, because it's not all just about the bottom line. And young people today don't want to go work for a company where it's just about making money, getting a paycheck. They want to go work for a company where they feel their talents and skills are being maximized, and where they feel that they're making a difference in that, especially for the future. So, young people are not interested in going work for a company that pollutes, for example, and is contributing to climate disasters. They want to work for a company that's part of the solution. So I think the story is becoming a little more complicated. So companies who are interested in and really kind of setting a trajectory, I would say, that includes all of those other things, have to get clear on what their story is. And I tell you, every company's got a story, whether they are conscious of it or not. They have a story, and the question is, do they want to take charge of that story and direct it, and hopefully for the good.
Well, I think that's very encouraging, and I hope that that trend continues. I know it started probably back in the 80s, and the example that's coming to my head is McDonald's. When McDonald's switched from those polystyrene containers that they put their burgers in to the green sort of paper, cardboard, recyclable things.
Well, that's an example. I think where companies are becoming more conscious. That Walmart is putting pressure on all of their vendors to decrease the packaging they're using. Where people are starting to ask questions about plastic. A lot of that plastic ends up in the ocean, and then it degrades, and the fish eat it, and then we eat the fish, and it's showing up in our bodies. We're going to be, I think, if we're going to have a future as a human race, and we're not going to destroy the planet, we're going to have to think differently about what it means to be part of the planet and not just use it. So that's where we're. I think you need a transformative story to get you there.
How would a storytelling experience help a CEO to better connect with his employees who might feel that they're just a number, that they're not really appreciated for their efforts? How would what you do help make that connection better?
So I think there are three fundamental core stories a good leader has to be a master of. And the first, and you have to answer three questions. And the first is, who am I? And if a leader has had a chance to explore who he or she is and knows their story, I think that will make them a more empathetic person. And I think we're looking for leaders who are empathetic. I'll give you a great example. There was a hospital executive I knew of who every week he would send out an email sharing stories of things that were going on with his family. Maybe his wife just brought in the tomatoes from the garden, or his son fell off of his bicycle and they had to make a visit to the ER at the hospital, or their daughter just won an award for a dance competition. And as he was walking down the hallways of the hospital, there were over 5,000 employees. There's no way he could know everyone's name. But people knew who he was, and they would stop him and say, "How's your son doing? Is he doing okay?" And that gave him an opportunity to have a conversation with a janitor or a housekeeper or a nurse or a tech that he might not have ever done, and to get to know them and get to know their story. So that becomes an important piece. And then the second is, who are we? And every organization, I think, has a set of values. You could probably interchange them across most organizations, and they would probably work okay. They all sort of sound alike generally. But how do you bring them to life? And you have to look at how you and I learned our values. I didn't have a sampler on my kitchen wall that my parents put there and said, "Here's our 5 family values." That would be kind of weird. But I've actually met a couple of people who did have that. But that's an unusual thing. We learned our values by observing what other people did in our family, or what kinds of behavior was modeled for us. And in traditional cultures, we would have learned our values through the stories that were told. And the same is true in organizations. It's around the water cooler. That's where you find out how things really get done around here. But it's also through the stories. There's a wonderful guy who runs Armstrong International, David Armstrong, and he got rid of his policy and procedures manual, and he just put in stories. Because if anyone even reads those things, that's a rarity. They end up on a shelf. But if you hear the stories stick. And so if you have a question about what the right thing to do is, you can think back on a story. It tells a great story of, there was a guy spilled alcohol on the shop floor, and they manufacture lots of metal, big things out of metal. And he was thinking, how do I get this stuff cleaned up? If I use rags, then I got rags that are soaked with alcohol. Well, then what do I do with them? So he decided to burn the alcohol off of the concrete floor. And he did that successfully. And he was summarily fired. Now, they had two big values in that organization. One, they really valued creativity, and they talked about it a lot, but they also valued safety, and that trumped everything. And so in this case, creativity was a subsidiary value to safety. And so if you heard that story and you were suddenly confronted with a situation where you had to choose between creative or safe, you probably go with the safe, and that story would stick with you. And the third kind of story that a good leader needs to master is, where are we going? And to be able to articulate that in a way that engages teams and staff. And it can't be just in a document that sits on a shelf. It has to be continually communicated. And that's why a good leader needs to be a good storyteller. And this fits in with the book that we just brought out, is The Power of Story to Communicate. And so leaders have to be, I think, great communicators.
We've got about 1 minute left. So your book is called Story Intelligence. And how long has it been out?
It just came out about 2 weeks ago, and it's doing quite well. It made international best-selling status on Amazon in its first few days, so it's really taken off. And it details the 7 powers of story that we think that we all need to master. And that anyone who's, like, for example, interested in emotional intelligence, we think that story intelligence is actually supersedes that and can amplify your emotional intelligence. And so it gives you a great read and a lot of concrete things you can do to expand it in your life.
Well, that's great. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Absolutely, yeah. They can find out more about the book at StoryIntelligence.com. And there's also lots of resources there. We've been interviewing many of the leaders in the field, and we also have tons of blogs and other kinds of resources that I think would be valuable for any reader. So, and you can learn more about how to order the book there as well. You can also find it on Amazon.
Okay, great. Well, Richard, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing. This is very interesting, and we could have gone on quite long with this with this concept, but I think we gave an overview that people might be interested in, and then they can pick up the book to find out the rest, how the story ends. Okay, take care. Best of luck.